Okay. All right, guys, we're live. Thank you very much for joining us today. We've got a great show for you today. So first of all, thank you for everyone who's in the live chat already. Thank you for everyone who's in the comment section already. I appreciate you being here. Like I said, we've got a great show for you today. I'm talking to someone who I find very interesting. I've been watching him over the past couple of days, and I've been following what he says and the shows that he does. And I found all of that very interesting, very intriguing. So I thought it would be great to have a little chat. So please help me welcome to the show, Christian Watson. Christian, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here, Sham. I also follow your show as well. I think that it's, especially your global channel, is one of the best sort of bridges for for international conversation. And I also want to know more about India as well. So I think that your show is really good about that.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. So let's start with you, Christian. Tell me a little bit about your background and what your political foundations are.
All right. So right now I'm a college student. I'm in my, I'm not sure how it works over in India or anything, but I'm in my third year in American University, and for a bachelor's degree, which I'm getting, is typically 4 years. So I have like one more year left, maybe even less than that if I work a little bit harder in my classes. But on the side, well, I shouldn't say on the side because this is actually what I'm trying to do as a full-time job. I am a political commentator and an aspiring public intellectual. So I write a lot. Well, I used to write much more a year ago than I do now. Now I mostly focus on YouTube and my podcast, Pensive Politics. And my entire goal is to simply break the illusions, break the falsehoods that seem to be consuming American politics from every side. And, because those are the biggest threats to our ability to understand where we are in our current political condition and then manifest a change. Those are the biggest threats to our understanding. If you can't understand something, you cannot effectively or even morally, in a sense, interact with it. And so one of the goals of my show and my YouTube channel is to bridge that divide, or even give people the tools, people who may not even agree with me, to understand the fundamentals of American politics. And so now, I do have a bias, of course. I'm not a journalist necessarily. I am a right-leaning libertarian or conservatarian, wherever you might say. I mean, I have some conservative values, but I fundamentally believe that force should only be wielded to protect individual rights. And if it's wielded in any other instance, it is an unjust and unethical action. So I don't believe that, the use of force is something that should be used liberally or used to pursue some sort of cause. So I am a libertarian, but I do believe that, character matters. To a certain extent, I think culture matters insofar as the culture is built around preserving our individual rights, not built around moralizing to some grand sentiment. So because I think that, a lot of people who are culture warriors might say, well, and I get this argument all the time, libertarianism doesn't really provide to preserve the culture or preserve virtue. It's like do whatever you want all the time. But that's just a very flawed. Number one, it's a very stereotypical view, which kind of shows the deficit of knowledge they have about the subject. It's also just a very flawed view philosophically. Libertarianism is as much about character and virtue as any other thing is, and I think that people need to realize that quickly. And I'm trying to help them get there. So that's me in a nutshell.
And speaking about culture as well, I feel like one of the big differences that I see in sort of libertarianism and the dominant left ideology in the Democratic Party at the moment is in terms of like culture, especially you were talking about culture. I tend to see libertarianism as slightly more bottom up as opposed to the left, which is a lot more top down, whereas culture is decided, relatively from on high. And that's also a case in conservative circles a little bit, but libertarian circles, it's a little bit different where it's more bottom up, which I think is the more natural human tendency, right? Culture develops more bottom up. People are more free when culture and economics develops more bottom up rather than top down.
Right. This is a law of human interaction. It's a law of nature almost. And if you believe the sort of, and I'm going to say some pretty obscure things, but I'll explain. It's like, John Locke, the British philosopher guy who, just theorized and articulated this idea that all of us have rights that don't come from government, all that kind of stuff. All that kind of stuff feeds itself to this sort of bottom-up approach. Economics which libertarians prefer microeconomics over macroeconomics, feeds itself to this bottom-up approach because it's all about human interaction. Ludwig von Mises said human action. That was his book that he wrote. It's about the action of human beings insofar as they contribute to the world in some way.
Right.
You can only, and libertarians fundamentally believe, and many conservatives actually believe this as well. Some don't, but many do, that human action, and you can only really measure society on the basis of human action in the individual. Society is not this massive organism that we can prod and lead to greatness through force, or that we can measure perfectly, or that we can prepare antidotes for, or that we can prepare a decisive analysis for. I know that kind of goes against science and everything like that, but it's not. Society is this right here, Sham, you and I.
Yeah.
Society is a religious, not in a like sort of zealous sense, but in a spiritual sense, both a religious, a personal, and a public experience. The thing is, we haven't really connected the person, the spiritual, to the public yet. We've kind of just stayed in the public, and we've let people who are not us. We've let social scientists. We've let people who are the experts determine how we best should interact, determine how we should best, think about things, determine how we should best love people. And when you have that kind of external pushing, that sort of external exhortation, that is not you, that does not come from your heart, that does not come from a pure intention.
Right.
What you get is ultimately a disharmony, a severe disharmony that leads to cultural conflict. So ultimately, the individual is the prime unit of society. And if you don't understand that, you cannot understand anything about human interaction. That's my opinion.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it does make sense because, if you give control to a small group of people in deciding what society should be, what culture should be, what economics should be, then you're pretty much allowing that small group to play into their biases and use whatever their biases are, whatever their experiences are, and then project those experiences and biases on the rest of the country, which
Precisely.
is, if you look at that in an objective way, that's completely unfair to the rest of the society, right?
Absolutely. And unfair and unjust too. Unjust, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so, sorry, finish your point. Go ahead.
No. You hit the nail right on the head, man. That is both unfair, unjust, immoral, everything. But we have this sort of cult of the expert in society. I'm not trying to be an anti-intellectual. I like academia. I don't like where it's headed, but I like academia. I read a lot of academic literature, a lot of obscure stuff. I appreciate the process that academics have to go under to become a part of the institutions that are supposed to dispense knowledge in a very efficient way to people. In all reality, they kind of indoctrinate a lot of folks now, but that's a different topic. I understand the concept of academia, but I think it is the height of hubris and the height of arrogance for something. They can better decide how you should interact with people.
Right.
Because they went through more schooling than you or more education than you. Well, I'm sorry. You can't educate yourself to greatness.
Yes. I think that's a very good point.
Yeah, Ralph Waldo Emerson said, he's a famous American writer. He said, among other philosophers, he said that I can only know a man by their work. I don't know you by the institutions you're aligned with. I don't know you by the family name that you bear. I can only know you by your work. I can only measure you by your work. So what I would say to people that might be wondering, well, what do we do if we don't listen to experts about how we should interact? I just say, do your work. Do your work in conjunction with a coherent value system that is predicated upon, in my opinion, the best system is non-aggression. But whatever works for you, really.
Right. I agree with that. And looking at, libertarian values, there's also a difference between sort of what is considered the traditional GOP, I suppose, and libertarians as well, right? Because if you look at, some of the common talking points in conservative circles, they say small government, and that's one of the key figures, is small government. And I feel libertarians obviously agree with that as well. But one of the places where sometimes libertarians and conservatives tend to disagree is that even though conservatives say small government, they still believe in having a very large sort of military presence, and sometimes giving pretty overreaching powers to something like a homeland security, which if you look at both of those instances, they're both instances of big government, right? They're not necessarily small government. So where does your kind of political leanings, ideology lie in terms of what should be small government, what should be big government?
Right. So, yeah, and it's important to, I think, distinguish. You made a very good point. So conservatism is it's like, I don't know, it's like a market has endless choices, apparently.
Right.
Because a lot of people who are leaving the left, I know we'll talk about this later, are coming over to the Republican Party or conservatism and saying, okay, I'm a conservative. Conservative means small government. It means family values. It means, do what you want as long as you don't harm me. It means freedom of thought. That's what conservatism means. Right. Well, yes, a lot of those things have been associated with American conservatism, and they are, in a sense, I think, a part of it. Right. But I think you have to understand political ideologies at their core root if you're going to really understand them as a whole. And really, conservatism to me simply means conserving the traditions of whatever area that conservatism manifests in. Okay. So in America, conservatism would be about conserving the Constitution, conserving, the culture of liberty. And in that instance, I am a conservative. I think the Constitution is important. I think the founders were important. Not all of them were perfect. And some of them were very unlibertarian, actually. Right. People think the founders were all about freedom. Nope. John Adams, the Alien Sedition Act. These folks were not all about freedom. But a lot of them had that zeal of liberty within them that built a foundation that allows to take that and develop it. That's how ideologies and cultural mores go. They are developed by people that come after. Oftentimes, they start and develop. So in that sense, I'm very conservative. But when you want to conserve actions that the government has taken for decades for the sake of conservatism, then it's definitionally conservatism, but I don't think it's right. So when you want to preserve the United States military hierarchy around the world, its imperial hierarchy around the world, it's over 800 plus bases around the world that have missile silos and all kind of other things around the world. Yep. Yes, you're being a conservative, but I don't think you're being a consistent conservative. You're not being consistent with the United States' foundation of liberty. Right. So I think that when people say conservatives, like they a lot of them just operate with what they want it to be, and that's good because conservatism is a really valuable ideology, in my opinion. But I think there's a little bit more than that. But as for my personal beliefs about government and everything, I believe that, and this is going to sound radical, I don't think the government should be in very much. I think the government should be involved in military defense. They should be involved in contract law. They should probably be involved in mediation between countries with some sense of diplomacy. But I would actually see a lot of services the government does to the private sector: education, commerce, the EPA, everything. I would probably just slash it all, get rid of it all, and then see it to the private sector. Because I honestly think that I think for a few reasons actually, I think that if people who are closer to the effects of their decision, like for an education example, a bureaucrat in Washington who's legislating these broad standards, they don't really have a lot of stake if their child suffers from them. But the person who is close to it, the mother, the father, the guardian, whatever, they have a lot of stake because they're investing in that child. Right. And so I think that people who are closer to their own situations can best make their own situations, best determine their own situations. Right. The environment's the same way. So the government itself has actually destroyed the environment several times. In America, the Gold King spill back a few years ago, the EPA literally just spilled a bunch of toxic waste oil into a river, and then stopped itself from being sued. If Exxon, and the government does this all the time in many different areas, but if Exxon were to do that, you know what would happen to Exxon? They wouldn't have a good time. Yeah. The Gulf spill was a bill. It was a big ordeal for a reason. So no, I think that the government is the most inefficient operator of these things. It also probably doesn't have the ethical justification to operate a lot of the things that it operates today. So I would have a very small government. As Rand Paul said, so small you can barely even see it. I mean that. And it might be real radical, but that's what I see. I want government there. I'm not an anarchist whatsoever. No, I don't believe in anarchy. I have friends who are anarchists. I think anarchy is interesting. I am not an anarchist. Government is needed to protect rights, I believe, but that's about all I should be doing.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit about the walk away movement, because this became pretty prominent a couple of years ago, and I think some people know about it, but there's a much larger audience, I think overseas at least, that doesn't really know about what the walk away movement is, that tends to see communities within the United States as sort of like monoliths, because oftentimes within leaders within these communities, or let's say not leaders but prominent people within these communities, present these communities as a monolith. So explain to us a little bit about what the walkaway movement is and what its genesis was.
Yeah, walkaway movement is excellent. So the walkaway movement is essentially a social media movement. Well, the principle behind walkaway has been around for like decades, but this iteration of it, which is basically a social media movement that supports people who decide to leave the Democratic Party most of the time out of a sense of revelation, not because they're trying to get fame or whatever, or because they're trying to be different, more so out of revelation. And so they they have a YouTube channel called #WalkAwayCampaign, and they post all of their testimonials there, like 20-minute long testimonials of people who have been Democrats or leftists their entire lives. And they're like, you know what? My family believe this, my friends believe this, and I feel as if I'm taking a step. I'm risking a lot. I'm risking my social security. I'm risking my standing. I'm risking a lot of things that I, as a human being, desire to be a socially effective creature.
Right.
But this is the contents of my heart.
Right.
And you have people who, harbor libertarian conservative views, getting fired from their jobs, getting fired from the organizations that they're on. And so walkaway is essentially the culmination of the pretension that has always been there on the side of the left. That's all it is. Right. It's people saying, you know what, I'm tired of this. I don't have to think like you because I'm a black person, or because I'm a gay person, or because I am a whatever. I don't have to think like you. I don't have to think because I have my own mind. My beliefs, my values have to be manifested by me. They're not determined by how I look.
Right.
They're not determined by what you can see evidently. I am a complex being. As Walt Whitman, the great Whitman, said, I contain multitudes.
Right.
And those multitudes take a hell of a lot more examination than just looking at me. Yeah. So walk away, in my opinion, is just righteous, because they are really saying, I don't care, what I was told in the past. I don't care what you say. I'm going to think differently. And thinking differently can be dangerous, but it's bigger than that. They're thinking differently so they can improve their lives.
Yeah, and that's another example, right? The leadership or the prominent people within these communities that present these communities as a monolith, that's another example of like that sort of top-down planning. Like, we tell you how to think, we tell you how to believe. It cannot be bottom-up. You can't just think for yourself and be like, you know what, I like the Republican guy this year, I'm going to vote for that guy. Maybe in 8 years from now, maybe I really like the Democrat guy, I'll just go vote for him then. You're not allowed to do that. You're supposed to be either A or B. And we see parallels of that in India as well. I know you're not very familiar with Indian politics, but in Indian politics, it's kind of very similar as well, where you have certain communities. For instance, let's take the Muslim community. The Muslim community in India is supposed to vote for a certain party, or is supposed to vote a certain way.
Wow.
And if you have any Muslims that vote for the other party, that is considered the anti-Muslim party, but it's not really. But if a Muslim votes for it, because that party, the BJP, which is called the anti-Muslim party, has been, just like I think the GOP has been increasing its vote share among the Muslim population, just like they've been increasing their vote share among the black population. So when you have a portion of the Muslim population that goes and votes for the BJP, they're treated as traitors. They're treated as traitors to their religion, traitors to their people, traitors to their country, just because they decided to participate in the political process of a vibrant, well-functioning democracy. And that's what I see here as well. If you have somebody who says, well, yeah, I am black, but that's not what defines me. I'm black, but I can think however I want. I can vote however I want. I can like whatever music I want. And if you do that, then you see such sort of vitriol and anger towards that person or those people from the leadership or the prominent people among the community, that it does take a lot of guts, I feel like, for members within that community to just be like, you know what, I'm done. I'm out of here. I'm done with this sort of quasi bullying that I've been subjected to.
Absolutely. Oh, it takes guts. It takes a sense of glory, I think. Not to sound plain, but it takes glory. It takes a lot of things, man. Right. And look, I never did I walk away? I don't think I ever walked away because I was never a part of that dysfunction in the first place. I was never a part of that leftist dysfunction in the first place.
I know, we're just like, nope.
Yeah. I was never. Well, when I was like a little boy, my family, when Barack Obama was elected, I remember I remember the event very well. I'm 20 now. I was 8, I was 8, I think. And we gathered around the TV, and when the moment Barack Obama was, announced by CNN, there was a sense of electric going throughout the room. Everyone was crying. People were falling on the floor. And this is even, even at my elementary school the next day. I mean, you're not supposed to talk about politics in elementary school, but you probably shouldn't because, these kids don't really understand. Many teachers were like crying and joy. I'm like, my Lord, what's going on? How does that? In retrospect, I'm thinking, how does a public figure have that much control over how you feel? And at that time, I was like thinking, like, yeah, because I didn't know any better. But that's the extent of my involvement in the Democratic Party. That is the extent. It was a very external, ignorant view that I grew out of quickly. Right. And so, no, and I think the walkway movement kind of exemplifies the importance of individualism, because if people respected the individual's ability to think for who they are, to think not in terms of what group they represent, what terms of like what religion they represent, but for themselves. If people recognize that, you wouldn't need to walk away. You wouldn't need derision towards either political side and in mass. You wouldn't need all these things, which ultimately I think do play into the polarization. You wouldn't need all that. You would just have conversation. Things wouldn't be perfect. You wouldn't need all this kind of stuff. But the fact that people are attacked, I mean, I've been told this myself, because I am a gay black man, and I represent certain views that people just don't like. I have been told. Some person told me a year or so ago, when I was dealing with them about systemic racism. They said, you know what? Every cop in this city, in this campus, sees you as and he said the N-word. He was a black himself, so I guess he can do that. I guess he can do that. I don't think so. But he said, they see you as an N-word. They see you as nothing but an N-word, and you're not going to get their approval by saying what they think you want to hear from them. Right. And I'm like, well, I'm not trying to get anyone's approval, number one. Number two, I'm not going to assume malice of all cops. Cops are a very diverse bunch. Some are very liberal, some are very conservative. Although with the broad attacks on them, many of them are going over to conservatives saying, like, please, help us. And so it's like an action reaction, a Newtonian principle, I guess. But I've gotten it myself, and I see why people walk away. The pretension is palpable. The anger is deep. And the arrogance is just off the charts. If I was a Democrat, by this time I've been thinking I would have walked away a long time ago. So I get it.
Was there anything specific, like policy-wise, or anything maybe in the culture wars-wise that has contributed significantly, you would say, in your experience, to the walkaway campaign?
Donald Trump.
Oh, really?
Yeah, definitely. So
about him, because what we hear in media, like if you're an Indian person, or if you're a non-American, or maybe a big city American who doesn't really live in the small towns or whatever, or who doesn't live in the United States, he or she is reading everything that's written in media, and everything that's written in media essentially has painted Donald Trump as a unrelenting Nazi. So what is it that's causing people to move away from the Democratic Party and towards a guy like him?
That
Right.
That pretension right there is exactly what's going. Look. Okay. Look, Donald Trump is a complex individual. I have many thoughts about Donald Trump.
Right.
I do not think he's a Nazi.
Right.
I do not think he's a racist. I do not think that he hates third world people. I don't think that he all these claims that are just lobbed at him, I don't think they're true.
Right.
I think they are a product, again, of a see reality as you want to see it, not a desire to correspond your sentiments with reality as it is, as it exists. It's the desire to kind of reimagine and reinvent reality in your mind, this sort of Cartesian idea. And we got to stop that because it's dangerous as hell. No, just frankly, it's dangerous. But when people actually find out who Donald Trump is, you know, whether like his character or his tone, there are plenty of legitimate criticisms to be allowed of Donald Trump. Plenty. As a libertarian, I have plenty of it. But when they found out who he actually is, when they've been told he's a racist, Nazi, bigot, homophobe, and they find out that he's not actually those things at all, or those things have been exaggerated, they're like, okay, not only am I harboring sentiments that I think better reflect what I believe, I'm now fighting against a side that is entirely pushing lies towards me and trying to indoctrinate me in those lies and then punishing me if I don't. Oh, I'm going to walk away. Donald Trump has been the greatest force for walk away in the history of this country.
Right. And I think
100%.
It's also important to sort of distinguish between Donald Trump as a person and a personality and Donald Trump as a president and his policies, right? Because I feel like the example that is given and the reason that is given that Black people should not, or any other group should not be voting Donald Trump or supporting Donald Trump is because, well, his personality, he's such an abrasive personality. He says dumb shit on Twitter. He says insensitive things every now and then. So, you know, why would you vote for such an insensitive, unthoughtful person? Fine, that's an argument. But you also have to sort of distinguish that from the policies that Donald Trump has passed and what he has done in terms of unemployment, Black unemployment, in terms of how the economy has been performing, you know, things like that. I think so. So you have to draw a distinction between the two. You may not like the person, but it's important for you to understand that maybe there are people who have been positively affected by his policies. And so maybe that could be a pretty legitimate reason to vote for the guy.
Oh, the people who have been locked up for victimless crimes that he's pardoned way more than Barack Obama has. Yeah. I mean, the for every one regulation I enact, I'm going to take away two, which is the principle that frees up the economy and frees up human energy to be as creative as possible. I mean, the tax cuts, which in my opinion didn't really go far enough. I wish he would have just abolished, the tax code early and maybe have a flat tax or something that where everyone. I wish would have abolished payroll and corporate and all that kind of stuff and just have one single tax. But that's just my crazy libertarian self. But no, I mean, he is one of the few presidents in the history of this country, who has not started a war or conflict with us.
Right.
People don't realize how important that is, because almost every other president before him, maybe excluding Carter and excluding some that were have started some kind of conflict or a war while they were in office.
Yep.
Seriously, Barack Obama surreptitiously and extrajudicially bombed Libya with the approval of the UN and into the disgrace of the Congress.
There's slave market as well today directly as a result of that policy.
Exactly. You know, they have not been able to get a stable provisional government for a long time. I think they have one right now. I don't know. I haven't followed them, but it took them a long time because they were in Chamberlain and they were in shambles. I mean, Gaddafi was an evil person, but I think, for all his evilness, he was also a stabilizing factor, in all honesty. And we actually funded Gaddafi back in the 90s, which is funny. We fund these people. We give them our training. We give them our weapons. Then we go and kill them. It's ridiculous to me. And George Bush, when he started the war in Afghanistan, Iraq, no sunset dates, gave himself this broad military power to do whatever he wanted to tackle any terrorist, but he deemed a terrorist arbitrarily. I mean, Bill Clinton and all that kind of stuff. So every president recently in contemporary history, the past 20, 30 years, has been enmeshed in war, has been enmeshed in conflict. Trump has really not. He dropped Moab, which I really care for, but it took out ISIS. He dropped bombs on Assad's bases. I hated that. That really made me upset because I don't think we need to be doing anything in Syria in the first place. But other than that, those two things, he hasn't really done much in relation to war. That is so underappreciated. And Biden's not going to be the same way. Biden is already saying he's going to return America back to its global stage to advance democracy.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's, you know what that means. Whenever somebody talks about advancing democracy, you know exactly what's going to happen there.
Unfortunate.
Yeah, and that brings us to the Biden and Kamala, the incoming administration as well. What are you expecting from essentially from this administration? Are you expecting like Obama 2.0 essentially? Are you expecting something different?
That depends on the composition of the legislature. So if the Senate remains Republican, a lot of folks will feel comfortable, but I think they shouldn't be, because if one Republican defects, it'll be a tie, and then Kamala Harris will be the tiebreaker. So regardless, Republicans will be walking on eggshells. This administration, they will be walking on it. They will be. I mean, the whips for the legislative body will be trying to get people as in line with the agenda as possible. They'll be threatening committee assignments and everything. I promise you, because they're walking on eggshells. So if the Democrats get into control, though, it'll still be very tight, but they'll have a slight majority. I think you're going to see a much more vivacious agenda from the Democratic Party. Lot more. You're going to see probably court packing go through. You're going to see there's already musings right now of possibly canceling student debt up to $10,000, even more than that. Biden is saying that he's willing to do that, and the Democratic Party is pushing for it. I mean, you're already seeing a lot of things that could possibly destabilize the economy and destabilize the dispensation of human energy in a productive way, destabilize our freedoms, the possible mask mandate, which I think Biden would try to do by executive order anyway. He wouldn't try to do that through law. I mean, so it really depends. It's really contingent. It's up in the air right now. But one thing is for certain, Kamala Harris will be running the show. And if Kamala Harris's ideology is any indication, she will run the show by force and by a very incisive, cutting, brutal mentality. Yeah. And so when you have a government that not only understands its authority and ability to wield force, but uses it for a particular political advantage, you have a dangerous government. Barack Obama understood his ability to wield force, and he wielded it for the first 2 years of his administration, and a little bit after then too, when the Republicans took over the House. But I don't think Barack Obama had the mindset that he was going to be some sort of. I don't think he had an authoritarian mindset. I think he had authoritarian tendencies, but not an authoritarian mindset. Kamala Harris, as evidenced by her actions, has an authoritarian mindset. And so that is going to be a big factor in the damage that the Biden administration creates. But also,
and there's also the small issue of the Green New Bill, which Kamala Harris has been a historic supporter of. She jumped on board pretty quickly, and it's legislations like that on the surface of it, they sound pretty benign, and they even sound wonderful. They're like, well, of course we should be preserving our planet. Of course we should be doing what we can to help the planet survive for future generations and all of that wonderful stuff. But if you start, peeling back the layers, if you start opening it up and reading it, it's a lot more coercive than people make it sound, because within the Green New Deal, there's obviously the whole thing about moving America to completely renewable sources within like 10 years or something like that. And there's very little incentivization going in there. It's mostly like, no, you have to do it. There is no option for you not to do it. You have to do it. And there's also other stuff in terms of like people who are going to lose their jobs within these 10 years because of these radical changes that you're going to be bringing in. Millions of people that are going to lose their jobs, you have to then shell out money to take care of them. And then you have to also install a $15 minimum wage everywhere. And so in a plan that sounds, very nice on paper, when you peel back the layers, it starts to appear a little bit more sinister. And the amount of monetary outlay that is going to require, like if Kamala Harris does have the kind of power that you and I believe that she'll most likely have, and if she says, you know what, I'm going to push this bill through because this is what I want, the kind of monetary outlay that's going to require is going to be absolutely it's going to be, it's like what, 40 trillion or something like that.
It's going to break the bank. It's going to break the bank and everything, and all.
And with the debt situation the way it is already, like, I don't know. Tell me what your libertarian self thinks about that.
The Green New Deal is wrong on many levels. It's wrong on an economic level. It's wrong on a social level. It's wrong on a moral level. Let's go with the moral level first. That's the more fundamental one to me, because everything else, we know. With the Green New Deal, and this is kind of the fault of environmentalism itself, starting back with Gaylord Nelson in the 60s, who was, he started Earth Day in America. He was one of those people who was the first pioneers of environmentalism in America. He was a senator from somewhere in the Midwest. I forgot what it is. But so the entire notion of the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, Green New Deal is that people aren't good stewards of the environment, but the government is, even though the government is composed by people as well. So you have a sort of error already built into that assumption. And then when the government is able to monopolize and enforce and then use their authority and their force to make certain environmental decisions, some of which may be dangerous to either property owners or dangerous to the environment itself, and then they can show themselves from recourse, you don't have an institution that is incentivized to actually protect the environment. The nature of the government is actually not meant to be incentivized by any benevolent goal. It's incentivized by one thing: the ability to preserve authority. This is what political theorists understood for a very long time. So what you have indicative in all these acts and this Green New Deal stuff, you have indicative a desire to mold human energies and mold what we do as individuals, to mold our free will to a particular end through forceful means, and that is both unethical and it's incorrect. You cannot force someone to be a good steward. You cannot force someone to have good character. You cannot force someone to obtain your standards. They won't be really obtaining your standards. They'll be acting out of the desire not to have the force, not to have the pain exerted upon them. Then once the pain is gone, they'll go back to their old ways. You have to habituate these things. Aristotle had the right idea back in ancient Greek. You have to habituate character, and I agree with that. You have to actually work for your character. You have to actually work to cultivate these things. But I do think that people have a natural interest in preserving the environment. I do think people have a natural interest in making sure their communities look nice, the trees look pretty, that their air is breathable. I do think that people have a natural interest in all those things. Isn't it funny that some of the most polluted states are some of the states in which the government has the most control over the environment, or supposed control? They tax rain in California. They tax rain in California.
They really? I didn't know that.
Yes. And they have one of the strictest environmental regimes in the country, in California. In fact, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, just said we're going to phase out gasoline-powered cars by 2030 something, and we're going to replace them with electric cars. Look, I like electric cars. That assumes that people are going to be in a mindset, in a place to relinquish the comfort and the affordability of gas cars. And you cannot. Government is not an oracle. It's not a seer. It doesn't know these things. It's acting out of its desires and is trying to enact the desires through force, which is unethical. So the problem with a lot of environmentalism is that it relies on unethical means to do what it wants to do. What you need to do is simply encourage people to activate their innate stewardship, their desire to see their communities look beautiful and pretty, and then go from there on a voluntary basis. Picking up litter, perhaps reducing the time they spend in their car. I don't know. Just do things voluntarily. That's all I'm saying. Don't try to force goodness on people.
I understand that a certain amount of environmental regulation is necessary to keep corporations that maybe only care about profit or something like that in check. I understand a certain amount of regulation. I can see the logic behind keeping, to make sure that people or companies do not go crazy. But what really bothers me is what you hit upon is the coercive aspect of it, is that you have no choice. We will not give you any other way of doing this but our way. It's not like we can maybe tax petrol cars or whatever a little bit extra. It's not like we can incentivize people to go green by giving them tax breaks or something like that. No, we want to force you. This is what you have to do, and you have no other choice. And I don't know, that just really rankles with me. It just really rubs me the wrong way when people are like, no, this is the only way available for you, and there's no other way that you can do this. I just feel and the way American society is in general, the way American society has traditionally been in general, they've got that kind of like mindset. I've lived here in the US long enough to now know that people have this mindset where they do not like being told what to do. So when you do that, it's most likely going to fail.
Exactly. And you may be familiar with this. Over in the East, in Asia, and the countries like that, a lot of them are much more communitarian based. A lot of them don't mind. In China, I mean, we're Confucius reigned for a long while, and where a lot of the sort of collective communitarian ideas reign. If the government says do something, they'll do it. They don't mind. It would be alien to them to do anything other than what the government says, or do anything other than the community says, or what the family says, because they're much more they much more cohere on that basis. But this is why you had Japanese soldiers holding out after World War II. Yeah. This is why I don't think most soldiers under a normal system would not have had that much determination and dedication. But it's because their individuality is supplanted by this grander idea, an idea that they can't really perceive, but is sold to them, this sort of false idea of the broader community that they don't serve themselves or their interests. They serve something outside of them. So if they serve something outside of them, that kind of pushes them to neglect themselves. And if you neglect yourself, you cannot live effectively in this world, period. And so, that's why China is able to get away with a lot of stuff they can over in Beijing, and whether it's with Uyghurs, whether it's with expression of information, whether it's with the internet blocks, whether it's with the monitoring of people's personal dealings. Trying to get away with that kind of stuff. People, as far as I understand, Beijing has a big airport. People can go into the airport and fly out anytime they want to. As far as I understand, no one is keeping them in China, but they accept it. Yeah. They are fine with it. And there are many reasons for that, but they are fine with it. And that's disturbing to me. Because really, culture condition you to neglect the truth. And the truth of the human condition, in my earnest opinion, is that all of us are ultimately individual souls, and our decisions should be based upon us as individuals first, and everything else second, third, fourth, and whatever. Right. But when you have countries where that doesn't exist, you get totalitarianism, you get authoritarianism, you get destruction and death. So I'm happy America has a proud tradition of liberty and defiance, because if we didn't, this country would have been gone a long time ago. Right.
And that idea brings me to sort of speech as well, and in general the concept of free speech and the policing of speech. And we touched upon it earlier a little bit as well, about because now in the last 10 years a new platform has evolved where people are using their speech most frequently, and which is social media. And we remember Obama towards the end of his sort of reign talking about the problems with social media, talking about problems with hateful speech on social media, and then really transformed into this monster during Trump's reign, where people wanted to cancel people or deplatform people, or if I don't like what you're saying about trans people, then you're obviously transphobic. There's no other third reality that can exist. And so we have to deplatform you, we have to cancel your book, we have to cancel your show, we have to kick you off your TV show, whatever the hell the case might be. And now again, like when Obama was promoting his book, he was talking about the challenges with social media and how we have to police speech there. We've already seen big Democratic politicians and big leaders within the liberal circles talk about how it's very important for us to police speech on social media and remove people who do not think the way we do. And I do think that's going to be a big challenge going forward, especially because we've noticed that social media companies seem to be at least willing to censor speech based on like a little bit of pressure that's built upon them from politics or culture in general. So that's a really tricky situation that's forming, because most of this censorship is aimed towards, let's say, not just conservative, but people who don't think exactly like the left. So let's just call that a big umbrella. Let's just call that the non-left. Yes. So that's generally focused, that kind of censorship, more on the non-left. And do you see that becoming more of a problem in the Biden-Harris administration? Because I do.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Because, for example, so and a lot of this has to do with communications policy, because that's the organ they would use to sort of obstruct speech. That's the only organ they possibly could use, the FCC, which kind of regulates all this kind of stuff. And we have to understand, President Trump said, no, FCC, we're gonna get rid of, a lot of the things you have. We're going to allow net neutrality. We're going to do all these things. We're not going to impose these sort of standards upon you. It's net neutrality kind of stuff. You could possibly see a reverse of that. A reinstitution of the old policies of the Obama administration, because net neutrality came under the Obama administration. And you could possibly see the FCC wielded as a bludgeon, as a hammer against ideas that are considered hateful or offensive. You don't think so? Well, I think America's tradition of liberty and our First Amendment is very important and sacrosanct. But there are places in this country where you can be charged an enhanced penalty for a hate crime, which is essentially a hate crime. There are places in this country, and they have survived First Amendment challenges. And so I think that if they can convince people that speech is violence, which is a very prominent idea in the critical race theory circles. And critical race theory is very popular on the left right now, incredibly popular. Those of you who don't know what that is, it's this sort of idea that you can critique society through a mechanism of power and privilege. All social interactions are basically the result of power on one side and privilege on the same side, and everyone else who doesn't have those things are disaffected. They're in a destitute state. They're vulnerable, and they typically do it and through race. They typically do it in the lens of African American experiments, whatever that means. It's sort of broad African American experiment. I never understood that when someone said the black experience. Like what black experience? Man, whatever. But so. If you see these mentalities advanced further in the Biden administration, which I think you will, I think you could possibly get a chilling of free speech, especially in social. Because really, the courts have not ruled. Is social media a public forum or is it a private platform? The courts haven't ruled that. I think they're private platforms personally. But if they are a public forum, if they're ruled that way, you will definitely see government regulation 100%. Yeah. But if they're considered to be a private platform, I think it'll be much harder. But your opinion about the culture is more interesting to me, actually. Will the culture around these things change? And I think leftists will become emboldened. I think Twitter and all those stuff will become emboldened, because if you don't have an executive there, banging them over the head with threats of subpoenas, then these people will probably be a little bit more liberal in the use of their bans and everything like that. Not saying that we need an executive there. I'm just saying for a fact, Jack and Mark Zuckerberg, they're scared of being called to Congress. They're scared of being in the sights of the president or senator. But I think that if you have a leftist in power, you're going to see a much more loose sort of exercise of power on Zuckerberg's part and Jack's part. But really, the entire thing, I think that people, if they're not pleased with Facebook or Twitter, go somewhere else. I don't think we need the government to
that creates another problem, right? I feel that does create another problem, because another example was recently you had this book publishing company who was going to publish Jordan Peterson's new book, and people got really, really upset. Employees of Penguin got really upset. I heard somewhere that they were crying that Jordan Peterson's book's getting published. And I'm like, why are you an adult crying in your office? What are you doing, man? What went wrong in your life that you're an adult weeping in your office that somebody's book is getting published? But anyway, they got really upset, and now Penguin might do it, might not do it. We don't know. But then I feel like that creates another problem. Like you said, if you don't like it on Twitter, go somewhere else. And I feel like eventually a situation will happen that people keep getting kicked off of Twitter, so they'll just go somewhere else. And there's these two different ecosystems that'll be created. One ecosystem for conservatives, one ecosystem for liberals, one publishing ecosystem for conservatives, one publishing ecosystem for liberals. And that creates an even deeper divide in society than exists right now, because right now people are bickering at least on the same platforms. At least they're still, even though they're fighting, but they're still communicating with each other. We might end up in a situation because of this trend of censorship that you have these two peoples in these two ecosystems that do not interact with each other at all, and just think the absolute worst of each other. And that is a polarized society that, I think we don't want to be a part of, right?
No, and no, I agree with you. Here's what I think, though. I think the move to Parler and all these other things are just really overstated. I don't think Twitter is going to lose the gravitas it has for now. Because Twitter, I mean, Parler attracts more right-leaning people, and they have some right-leaning celebrities there. But Twitter has heads of state. Twitter has government accounts. Twitter has, restaurants and all kind of things, corporations, and there are just a lot of things on Twitter, entertainment venues it's insurmountable right now, even by a value dollar to unseat it from this position of digital authority. So a lot of Twitters who have gone over to Parler, they still post on Twitter a lot. I've watched this. They're like, guys, I'm on Parler now. Follow me there. They're on Twitter like every 5 minutes. So look, exactly. I'm not saying that Parler is a better. It's not. It's necessary, I think, but Twitter is still going to be there. Facebook is still going to be there. Conservatives are kidding themselves. They think that they're going to supplant both of those things by being angry. No, you guys are still using those services because they're most convenient. They're good for your brand. And so now if a situation arises in which all that goes away and Twitter really messes up, which again, I'm not sure they can mess up more than they messed up already, then yeah, you could get a really polarized sort of society. But what I think would happen most interestingly, you would probably see people reevaluate the way in which they see social media. Social media right now is seen as this sort of inescapable fact of reality. If they can't exercise their voices freely, as human beings have shown in the past, they will find a different avenue. Forget alternate platforms. Maybe we'll see a return back to interpersonal interaction. Maybe we'll see the rise of the Zoom call community, which, they have certain Zoom communities that just, talk about things in a big group chat. Maybe we'll see something like that happen because, Zoom doesn't really care what you're doing or who you are. Skype doesn't really care if anyone uses Skype anymore. I feel like an old man saying Skype.
I know, Zoom and Skype, right?
But so I think you would see people go, if they get so disaffected with social media, they go elsewhere because people are already, let's be honest, social media has already had a devastating toll on people's mental health, on their interactions in real life. It's a beautiful thing, but a damning thing in the same sense.
Yes.
So I think that would be the next move. That's what I see, at least. That's what I'm divining everything. I could be entirely wrong, and sometimes I am entirely wrong. But I think you would rather see something like that than just two groups that just go into their constituent areas. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah, I'd certainly hope so. And before I let you go, I do want to ask you finally a little bit about, this summer there were these massive protests all across the country about the police and the police's behavior with people in certain communities in particular. And, there was obviously a lot of debate around police reform and whether or not the police is systemically racist, whether or not police officers overall are to blame. Like, how do we have that debate? And, I feel like the reaction to these, to what happened to George Floyd, obviously, I think universally people were horrified at what happened to him. Secondly, I think universally, a vast majority of people were generally in favor of the protests. Like, hey, police should not be treating citizens in this manner. I think generally people were in favor of that. Where I think people diverged from each other were on how do we tackle this issue? Because some people immediately that are now in power immediately jumped on the bandwagon of defund the police, get rid of the police, replace them with hospital workers or like friends, people that are going to shake your hand when you're about to get into a shootout with another. I don't know. It was something like that. They'll hold your hand while you're in a shootout or something like that. But defund the police, get rid of the police. The police is entirely racist, and every single police interaction is racist, and stuff like that. And the other side of the debate was like, well, obviously, all of the police force is not racist. Obviously, every single police officer is not a terrible person. Otherwise, we would see incidents like George Floyd every single minute of every single day, because there are literally millions of police interactions every week. But to mitigate such instances as what happened to George Floyd in the future, we have to take certain actions in terms of how are we training these people? Are we psychologically testing people that are, wanting to join the police force? Some common sense solutions to the issues at hand. And how do you approach this issue? How do you approach this divide? Because there seems to be a division within America with people who think that the police should be gotten rid of and they're racist, and people that are very strongly behind the police, but they feel like there are some smaller tweaks that need to be made.
Right, and so this is a very interesting question because the divide, particularly on the left side, reflects a certain mentality that is bestowed upon people by this sort of critical ideology, this critical race theory ideology, which basically says that people are the product of institutions. This is what French theorist Michel Foucault said back in the 70s. People are the products of institutions. Yes. Therefore, if you understand institutions, you can understand people. And this is the more advanced argument against the cops. I saw someone say that making this bad apple argument is terrible because even though not all cops are actively overtly racist, they are a part of a racist system. Therefore, they're committing an unethical thing. Yeah. Okay, well, the problem with this argument, other than the fact that it is just incredibly presumptuous, it's incredibly presumptuous, and it's built upon the idea that America is racist or the system is racist, which is not true, is that you cannot understand individuals through institutions. You cannot assume that an individual is always going to obey their institution, even most of the time. Because guess what? We have something called a conscience. A lot of us do have innate moral ideas built into us that guide our thinking and decisions. That's why if you see a puppy get kicked, folks are kind of abhorred. They're like, oh my gosh, there is objective morality. There is absolutely objective morality. So in that sense, I think cops really, you have to understand them on an individual level. That's number one. You have to absolutely do that. You have to understand that, many of them, for example, in New York City, New York State, actually, many sheriffs did not want to enforce Governor Cuomo's Thanksgiving regulations. They are part of the system, but they said, you know what? I will not do it because there is something higher than you, Governor Cuomo. There is a law that exists outside of you, Governor Cuomo, that I cannot violate, that I preserve. That's the mentality we need to instill in every police department across the country. If we do that, I think this problem will largely be alleviated. So how do we do that? Well, I think that we do that by getting rid of qualified immunity, making it easier to go after cops who may be bad apples. We do that by repealing unnecessary laws because cops are expected to enforce laws that may be themselves unjust. We do that by moving towards a community policing model that focuses on building up cooperation between people, that focuses on building up, the bonds of friendship with people, that focuses on, cooperating with folks who they police. Moving from I'm policing you to like I'm cooperating with you. We do that through, there's several things. Getting rid of civil asset forfeiture, in which the police are expected to go into someone's house, take their property without due process. There are plenty of things we can do to reform the system, which is so inexorably, according to people, racist and evil. No, it's not. It's flawed. Anything a human being makes is going to be flawed. It's flawed. It's flawed. It's flawed. And I don't care what mentality you have, what calculus you have. If it comes from a human mind, it's going to be flawed. We have to recognize that we have limitations on our humanity. We have to embrace limitations. Don't run from them. When we run from them, we get issues like this. So I don't think that defunding the police is the answer. I don't think that seeing the system as racist and therefore its participants as racist is the answer. I think seeing people as individuals, number one, as opposed to part of a class, and also recognizing that police have a particular purpose and they need to be able to execute that purpose in a very palpable, efficient, and ethical way. And we can help them do that by repealing the unnecessary gobbledygook that clogs up a lot of the legal system in America today. So that's what I think. And really, I don't know how anyone thinks that a social worker is going to be able to handle problems of society. I mean, social workers have existed for ages. And in a lot of instances, many of them are actually sometimes the problem. In all reality, sometimes they're the problem. So, no offense, social workers, sometimes they're the problem. So, I don't know. Government can only do so much.
Yeah, that's fair. And
Yeah.
we're seeing this election kind of got obviously overshadowed for obvious reasons by Biden winning and Trump losing. But another thing that I think got kind of lost by the wayside a little bit is what's happening within the Democratic Party, which is going to be very interesting to see over the next couple of years, which is there seems to be a schism developing within the Democratic Party between the sort of more centrist Democrats who don't want to say defund the police, who don't want to say, America is inherently racist and terrible, horrible society, and between the sort of more radical wing of the Democratic Party that is way more savvy on social media, which means that they can, get those retweets, get those likes, get those Instagram and Twitter followers, and get all those YouTube views and stuff like that. And that wing of the Democratic Party, which believes in these extremely extreme ideas, extreme measures, and Green New Deal and all of that fun stuff. And we also, I think, I don't know if you saw that call that happened between the Democratic caucus and there was Representative Spanberger and Jim Clyburn that were saying, stop saying defund the police.
Yeah, stop saying socialism
in 2022. Yeah,
and stop saying socialism.
Yeah, exactly. And then in response to that, AOC and Rashida Tlaib, they basically came out and they said, well, you're asking us to stop saying socialism because you're racist. It's because of racism that people are asking us to stop saying socialism, which, make heads or tails of that as you want. But that's going to be, I feel like, a big theme over the next couple of years. Like, who takes charge of the Democratic Party? And if, for me at least, if like you said, that this is going to be Kamala Harris running the show, then I have a feeling that it's going to be the more radical wing that gets to take charge.
Yes, entirely. Kamala Harris was seen as a moderate. She's not a moderate whatsoever. No. This is someone who vivaciously advocated for the abolition of private healthcare insurance when she was running for president.
Yep.
She said, we will abolish all private plans, put you under a government plan.
Remember, she said she will pass an executive order to ban assault rifles if Congress doesn't do anything.
An executive order. She's going to circumvent Congress. She's going to try to use the ATF to bear down upon millions of lawfully gun-owning Americans. This is not someone. Moderation does not exist in her vocabulary. The ancient Greeks would be bored about Kamala Harris. There would be Socrates would have a fit. I promise you, he would have a fit. It does not exist in her vocabulary. But the thing about Kamala Harris is that she's been able to avoid the radical label because of how she presents herself. Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they are very belligerent and they are in their presentations. They're immature, so they all are. They're all immature people who don't really know how to do real politics, who don't really know how to present themselves in a way that might appear to be acceptable. Harris does. That's why she's dangerous. That's where the danger lies in. And so, I think that you will see her kind of become the queen of this entire thing, and she'll moderate the shift over to the radical left. But she'll do it in a way that is very subtle, that is very that appears to have lip gloss, that it has a sort of a sort of glorified front to it. And I made this point in a video that I did about the vice presidential debate. Modern politics these days is about images and not substance. It's about how things appear. It's about how things look, about how things make us feel, as opposed to being about things as they actually exist in reality. And when you have that kind of status quo, where people focus more on what it appears to be as opposed to what it is, you have people interacting with a false idea of political reality. And Kamala Harris relies on that false idea, those smoke screens, those deceitful tactics to execute her political will. So keep your eyes out, people. Keep your eyes out. Keep your mind ready. Keep your faculty of reason prepared to dispense truth. You got to be in this yourself. It has to be, as I said, society is a spiritual and a personal and a public experience. Activate that trifecta and go for it. Because if you don't, people will be able to continue to deceive you. You won't be able to do much about it.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think that's going to be something very interesting to watch out for the next couple of years. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about that in the future as well, Christian.
Absolutely. I would love to come back on. Absolutely. Thanks
for doing this. This was a lot of fun, and it was great to know your perspective.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, you can go follow Christian on your channel's name is Christian Watson, right? On YouTube.
Yes.
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 And you
And
host a podcast called Pensive Politics.
yes, and that's on all platforms. And I also have a Twitter account as well, which is @officialcwatson.
All right, awesome. I'll share the Twitter account in the description of the channel as well, so you can go follow Christian there, guys. Again, thank you very much for watching the show. If you like it, if you enjoyed this discussion, like, share, subscribe. If you didn't, then abuse. Everything helps the channel out. So go ahead and do all of that fun stuff. And Christian, just stick around for a second offline with me as well. And other than that, guys, I will see you for the next episode. Until then, stay happy, stay healthy, and I will see you guys.